In the heart of Tandaza, a remote village embraced by the vast savannas of Africa, life moved at a slow, predictable rhythm. The sun rose and set with a golden brilliance, and the voices of children often echoed through the dusty paths as they played, their laughter blending with the calls of distant birds. Among these children, one fateful afternoon, a group ventured close to the oldest and most revered symbol of their village, an ancient Baobab tree, its roots twisting into the earth like the fingers of an elder holding secrets of a forgotten past. This tree, known as Ngoma Yawazi, was said to be the dwelling of ancestral spirits, a guardian of Tandaza's history. As the children darted and chased one another, a faint, almost imperceptible sound emerged from the tree. At first, they ignored it, thinking it was the hum of wind through the hollow trunk. But then, the sound grew clearer, a voice weak and trembling, calling faintly. Curiosity replaced their playfulness, and they crept closer. One of them, a boy named Jabari, peered into the hollow and froze. "There's someone inside," he whispered, his voice trembling. The others gathered, eyes wide, their excitement turning to fear. Inside the hollow of the great Baobab, they found a woman, frail and covered in dirt, her eyes sunken and skin pale from the years she had spent away from the sun. Her hair, once thick and braided, now hung in tangled strands around her face. She struggled to lift her head, whispering a single word that sent shivers through the children. Ebony. The name, though soft, was unmistakable. It was the name of a woman who had vanished from the village 3 years earlier, a name many had spoken only in prayers and whispers of loss. The children bolted back to the village, shouting in frantic unison. Their cries drew the attention of the villagers, who rushed toward the Baobab, disbelief etched on their faces. As they approached the tree, a hush fell over the crowd. Ebony, weak but alive, was gently helped out of the hollow. Her body was frail, her movements shaky, yet her presence was undeniable. Gasps rippled through the crowd as whispers began to rise. How could she have survived all this time? Was it the spirits of the tree that kept her alive? Some wept openly, while others clutched charms and whispered prayers to ward off evil. Ebony's parents, Bwana and Ife, pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down their faces as they fell to their knees beside their daughter. "My child," Ife sobbed, her hands trembling as she touched Ebony's gaunt face. "We thought you were lost forever." Ebony's lips moved, but her voice was too faint to carry. Her father leaned in closer, his weathered face streaked with tears. "She needs water," he said, urgency cutting through the awestruck crowd. As the villagers worked to carry Ebony back to the village, the whispers intensified. Stories of the Baobab's mysterious powers resurfaced. Tales of ancestors who could trap or protect souls within the tree. Some saw Ebony's survival as a miracle, proof that the spirits of Ngoma Yawazi had chosen to protect her. Others, more skeptical, questioned how anyone could survive without food, exposed to the whims of nature for so long. Among the murmurs, one voice rang out with a mix of awe and dread. If she was protected, why was she released now? It was Nyoka, the village elder, his piercing gaze fixed on Ebony as though searching for answers buried deep within her fragile form. As Ebony was carried into her family's modest hut, villagers lingered outside, too consumed by questions and speculation to leave. How had she endured such a harrowing ordeal? What had she seen, heard, or felt within the confines of the Baobab? And most importantly, why had she returned now, after 3 long years? The answers to these questions remained locked within Ebony, her expression unreadable as she drifted into an uneasy sleep. But one thing was certain: the quiet rhythms of Tandaza had been shattered. The return of Ebony was more than an incredible story. It was the beginning of something the village could not yet comprehend. Ebony had once been a source of pride for Tandaza. Her hands wove magic into fabrics, patterns so intricate that they seemed to tell stories of the savannah, the rains, and the village's spirit. Her smile, always warm and genuine, had the power to ease the harshest of days. People remembered her kindness, how she would share food with those in need and mend clothes for children whose families couldn't afford new ones. Ebony was not just a weaver of cloth, but of bonds, connecting people with her gentle nature and unshakable optimism. Yet, despite the love and admiration she inspired, her sudden disappearance had shattered the fabric of the community. 3 years ago, on an ordinary morning, Ebony had left her parents' home, humming a song as she carried a basket filled with dyes and thread. She was expected to return by sunset, as she always did, but that evening came and went with no sign of her. The next day, the villagers scoured the surrounding fields and forests, calling her name until their voices were hoarse. Days turned into weeks, and the once determined search grew quieter, burdened by hopelessness. While some whispered about a possible animal attack, others exchanged hushed theories of abduction. A few even suggested that Ebony might have run away, though no one could fathom why she would leave a village that adored her. For Bwana and Ife, her parents, these years were a never-ending cycle of despair and hope. Every night, Bwana lit a lantern outside their home, its glow a silent beacon for their lost daughter. Ife often sat by the doorway, clutching a piece of cloth Ebony had woven, a vibrant red scarf with gold patterns, rocking back and forth as though the movement could soothe her anguish. Despite the villagers' well-meaning condolences and the passage of time, the couple refused to let go of their belief that Ebony would return. "The earth does not swallow people whole," Bwana would say, his voice a mix of defiance and sorrow. Now, with Ebony back, the village gathered around the Baobab, their faces a mosaic of shock, relief, and curiosity. They leaned in as her frail voice began to break the silence, carrying the weight of 3 lost years. She spoke slowly, each word a struggle, her eyes distant as though she were still trapped in the hollow of that tree. "I was taken," she whispered, her voice trembling. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Taken? By whom? Or by what?" Ebony's words were sparse at first, as if her mind was sifting through fragments of memory too painful to piece together. "I don't know who or what it was," she continued, her tone tinged with fear and confusion. "I was gathering herbs by the forest's edge when everything went dark. The air felt heavy like it was pressing against me. I woke up inside the tree." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances, their imaginations conjuring all manner of possibilities. Was it the work of bandits? Or something far more sinister, something tied to the spiritual energy they believed the Baobab possessed? Ebony described the suffocating loneliness that had consumed her in the early days, her cries for help swallowed by the vast wilderness. The hollow tree, though spacious enough to sit and lie down, became her prison. At first, she thought she would starve, but strange things began to happen. "Food would appear," she said, her voice breaking. "Not much, just enough to keep me alive. A bowl of grain, a handful of berries, water too in a small clay pot. But I never saw who left it." Her parents, seated nearby, were overwhelmed with emotion. Ife wept silently, her hand clutching Bwana's as though to anchor herself to the moment. "Why didn't you escape?" someone from the crowd dared to ask, their voice tinged with both disbelief and desperation for answers. Ebony shook her head slowly, her hollow eyes meeting theirs. "I tried many times. The hollow was open, but every time I tried to leave, I felt something holding me back. An invisible force, strong and cold, like hands pushing me back inside." The villagers murmured among themselves, their voices rising like the buzz of restless bees. Could it be the spirits of the Baobab? Had they trapped Ebony as part of some divine punishment or mysterious ritual? Or was there another explanation, one rooted in forces beyond their comprehension? Ebony's story offered no answers, only more questions. Her words painted a haunting picture of survival, but they also hinted at something larger, something unseen that had kept her hidden for 3 long years. As her voice began to falter, Bwana stepped forward, his face etched with both relief and sorrow. "My daughter," he said softly, "you are here now. That is all that matters." But his words did little to quell the unease that hung heavy in the air. Ebony's return was a miracle, yet it came shrouded in an enigma that no one could ignore. The villagers lingered, their minds racing with possibilities, their hearts torn between joy and apprehension. What had truly happened to Ebony during those 3 years? And what did her return mean for Tandaza? These questions remained unanswered, leaving the village in a state of restless anticipation. The day of Ebony's disappearance had started like any other, bathed in the golden light of the savannah sunrise. Her footsteps were soft against the dry soil as she ventured toward the forest's edge, her woven basket swaying gently at her side. She hummed a familiar tune, one that her mother used to sing while weaving. The melody blended with the sounds of the waking village, the bleating of goats, the distant chatter of women fetching water, and the rhythmic thud of a pestle grinding grain. Ebony felt a sense of purpose as she walked, searching for the herbs her mother needed to treat ailing villagers. The forest, lush and alive, welcomed her with its symphony of rustling leaves and bird calls. The air smelled of damp earth and wildflowers, carrying with it a faint sweetness that made Ebony smile. She moved with practiced ease, recognizing the plants she needed and gently harvesting them. But as the sun climbed higher, the light dimmed unexpectedly. Dark clouds began to gather, heavy and foreboding, their edges flickering with the promise of a storm. The wind picked up, carrying a chill that made Ebony pause. She glanced toward the sky, her heart quickening as the once clear day turned ominous. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the landscape, its sound reverberating through her chest. Ebony knew she had to find shelter quickly. She turned toward the ancient Baobab tree, Ngoma Yawazi, a towering presence that stood at the heart of the forest. The villagers revered it as sacred, a living monument to their ancestors. Its hollow trunk was said to hold the voices of the elders, whispering wisdom to those who dared to listen. Ebony had never entered the Baobab, but with the storm closing in, it was her only refuge. As she ran, the rain began to fall, sharp and cold against her skin. Lightning lit up the sky, its jagged brilliance cutting through the darkness. Just as she reached the tree, a blinding flash struck the ground nearby, followed by a deafening crack that seemed to split the world apart. Ebony screamed, her vision swimming with bright spots as the force of the lightning threw her to the ground. She felt the earth tremble beneath her, the air thick with the scent of ozone and scorched grass. Disoriented and terrified, she crawled toward the hollow opening of the Baobab and pulled herself inside. When she awoke, the world had changed. The storm was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness that pressed against her ears. The interior of the Baobab was dark, the only light filtering through cracks in the wood. Ebony tried to steady her breathing, her heart pounding as she took in her surroundings. The hollows smelled of damp wood and something faintly metallic, a scent she couldn't place. She reached for the opening she had entered, but found her hand met with resistance. It was as if the air itself had solidified, an invisible barrier that refused to let her pass. Panic surged through her. She pushed harder, her palms stinging against the unseen force, but it was no use. She called out, her voice echoing within the hollow. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Her words were swallowed by the tree, met only with silence. Days passed in a haze of confusion and fear. Ebony tried everything to escape, but each attempt was met with the same impenetrable force. At night, she could hear faint whispers, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from the tree itself. They were too soft to understand, like a distant conversation carried by the wind. Food and water began to appear, left just inside the hollow. A small clay pot of water, a handful of berries, or a bowl of grain would materialize without explanation. At first, Ebony was too frightened to eat, worried the offerings might be a trick or a trap. But hunger eventually overpowered her fear, and she consumed what was given. The sustenance was just enough to keep her alive, leaving her weak but not starving. She started to feel the tree's presence in ways she couldn't explain. It wasn't just a shelter, it was alive, pulsating with a quiet energy that seemed to seep into her bones. The whispers grew louder, though still unintelligible, and she began to sense a pattern in their cadence. Ebony wondered if the spirits of the elders, as the villagers believed, were truly watching over the Baobab and now over her. But why they trapped her? What had she done to deserve such a fate? Her days blurred into weeks, then months. She marked time by the faint changes in light that filtered through the cracks, though even that became unreliable. The weight of solitude pressed heavily on her, threatening to crush her spirit. She thought often of her parents, of their warm smiles, and the way her mother's hands guided hers at the loam. Did they still search for her? Or had they given up, assuming the forest had claimed her? One day, as she sat in the stillness, Ebony felt a shift. The air inside the Baobab grew colder, the whispers louder and more urgent. It was as if the tree itself was alive with agitation. Ebony pressed her hands against the wood, tears streaming down her face. "Why won't you let me go?" she sobbed. For the first time, the whispers stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with meaning, though Ebony could not decipher it. And then, as suddenly as the storm had come, the whispers began again, softer now, almost comforting. Ebony felt something stir within her, a faint glimmer of hope or understanding. The Baobab, Ngoma Yawazi, was not her prison but her protector. It had shielded her from something far worse, though she did not yet know what. The realization brought no answers, only more questions. But Ebony clung to it, determined to survive and uncover the truth of what had happened to her that fateful day. Ebony's voice wavered as she described the strange and unexplainable events that sustained her within the ancient Baobab. At first, she had believed her survival was a fluke, the lingering remnants of some natural phenomenon she didn't yet understand. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks blurred into months, the realization that something beyond the realm of logic was at play became undeniable. The hollow tree, Ngoma Yawazi, had become both her sanctuary and her enigma. She spoke of a stream, cool and crystal clear, that emerged from the roots beneath her feet. Its waters would ebb and flow, seemingly responding to her needs. At first, she believed it to be rainwater seeping through the earth, but as the drought outside persisted, the flow inside the tree remained constant. The water bore a faint, sweet taste unlike anything she had encountered before, and left her with a strange sense of vitality after each sip. She marveled at how the stream disappeared as quickly as it appeared, retreating into the roots as if it were alive, leaving no trace of its presence. Her sustenance was equally puzzling. Fruits, unfamiliar in color and shape, would appear at random intervals. Some bore the texture of ripe mangoes, but glowed faintly in the dim light of the hollow. Others were small and delicate, bursting with juices that tasted of honey and wild herbs. The fruits were never abundant, just enough to keep her nourished. Their sudden appearance, accompanied by a gentle rustling in the wood, suggested that unseen hands were placing them there. Ebony's voice faltered as she admitted how many nights she had cried, staring at the offerings, wondering who or what was watching over her. The nights were the most unsettling. The whispers began as faint murmurs, just on the edge of her perception. At first, she dismissed them as figments of her imagination, her mind creating noise to fill the oppressive silence. But as the days stretched on, the voices grew clearer. They spoke in an ancient dialect, unfamiliar to her, but laced with an undeniable rhythm that felt like a song or chant. The whispers seemed to come from the very fibers of the tree, encircling her in their haunting melody. She tried to decipher their meaning, but the language was beyond her understanding. Yet, she felt its weight, a mixture of warning and guidance. One night, the whispers wove themselves into her dreams. She dreamed of ancestors draped in flowing garments of vibrant red and gold, their faces painted with symbols she had never seen. They stood in a vast, endless plain, the ground beneath them glowing faintly as if lit from below. One by one, they approached her, their hands outstretched, their lips moving in silent incantations. Ebony awoke in tears, overwhelmed by the vividness of the vision. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were trying to tell her something important. Each dream became more intricate, the ancestors guiding her through scenes of Tandaza as it once was, before the village, before the people, before the land itself had been tamed. The most vivid of these dreams came on what she later realized was the third anniversary of her entrapment. In it, a figure cloaked in shadows stepped forward from the line of ancestors. Its voice echoed in her mind, deep and resonant, though its lips never moved. "You are chosen," it said, the words filling her with equal parts awe and dread. protect the harmony of Tandaza. When she tried to ask from what she was protecting it, the figure faded, leaving her with more questions than answers. When Abony shared this part of her story, the villagers gasped. Their gazes darted to one another, their murmurs a mix of reverence and fear. The Baobab's sacredness was known to all, but this was something far beyond the myths they had passed down. Some whispered of prophecy, others of a curse. Abony, however, admitted that she did not fully understand. What harmony? What danger? Why her? The answers eluded her, just as the whispers of the Baobab eluded comprehension. Her survival became a source of fascination and skepticism among the villagers. They questioned her, prodding for details, hoping for clarity. Abony could only recount what she knew. The tree had sustained her, but at what cost? The whispers and dreams suggested a connection to the spirits of the ancestors, but their intent remained shrouded in mystery. She described moments of despair, when the whispers became deafening and her isolation unbearable. In those times, she had pleaded with the Baobab, pressing her palms against its rough bark, begging for release. Each time, the whispers would fade into silence, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The villagers' reactions ranged from awe to doubt. Some saw her as a messenger of the ancestors, sent to guide Tandaza through a perilous time. Others feared she had been cursed, her soul bound to the tree for reasons they dared not imagine. Abony herself felt trapped between these interpretations, unsure of her place in the unfolding narrative. Her survival inside the Baobab, sustained by forces she could neither see nor explain, was a riddle she was desperate to solve. But as she recounted her experiences, the growing unease among the villagers suggested that the answers might bring more questions and more danger that she was prepared to face. Abony's return to the village was not met with the joyous celebrations she had anticipated. Instead, there was a palpable tension in the air, an undercurrent of uncertainty that seemed to ripple through the gathering crowd. She had thought the villagers would greet her with relief, even reverence, for her miraculous survival. After all, she had returned from the depths of the Baobab, a living testimony to the power of the ancestors. But her arrival stirred something darker in the hearts of many. As she walked into the village, her once familiar surroundings now felt alien. The familiar faces of her friends and family were replaced by weary eyes, their gazes flicking to one another as whispers spread like wildfire. Some spoke in hushed tones, saying that Abony had been chosen, that the ancestors had granted her a gift, a divine miracle. Others, however, viewed her return with skepticism and fear. They spoke of omens, of curses, and of the unknown forces that had surely played a role in her disappearance. Among them stood Nyoka, the village elder, his expression grim and unreadable. His eyes, sharp and ancient, scanned Abony's every movement, as if searching for a sign, something that would confirm the fear that had taken root in his heart. And then, as the crowd fell into an uneasy silence, Nyoka's voice rang out, cutting through the tension like a blade. "You carry the mark of Ngoma Yawazi," he declared, his finger pointing to Abony's wrist. The villagers' gazes followed his gesture, and there, barely visible beneath the skin, was a faint, glowing symbol, an intricate design that seemed to pulse with an energy of its own. It was a mark that none could deny, a mark that was unmistakable in its significance. The crowd collectively drew in a breath, their collective unease growing with every passing second. To see this mark was to witness something ancient, something sacred, and something dangerous. Nyoka's voice deepened as he spoke again, his words heavy with suspicion. "You must prove that you are not cursed, Abony. Prove that you are still one of us." The words hit Abony harder than she had expected. She had thought of the villagers' reactions, of course, but hearing those words, spoken so plainly by Nyoka, pierced her heart. She had returned not just to the village, but to the very life she had once known. And now, she stood before them, marked by a force she couldn't fully comprehend, forced to justify her place among them. Abony's heart raced. What had she come back to? What had she become during her time inside the Baobab? The villagers were no longer sure whether she was a blessing or a curse. Her survival in the Baobab was miraculous, but there was a cost, an unsettling transformation that no one, least of all Ebony, could explain. A tension-filled silence followed Nyoka's words. The villagers, who had been unsure of what to make of Ebony's return, now waited for her response. The weight of their expectations pressed down on her, but deep inside, Ebony knew that this was her chance to prove herself, to show them all that she had not been consumed by the Baobab's mysteries, but rather had been chosen for something far greater. With a steadying breath, Ebony spoke, her voice trembling but determined. "I do not know what this mark means or why it has appeared, but I will prove to you all that I am still Ebony, the daughter of Tandasa. I will undergo the ritual of truth." The words were out before she could think them through. The ritual of truth was an ancient and sacred practice in their village, one that revealed whether a person was blessed by the ancestors or cursed by their wrath. The ritual was not taken lightly. It involved trials of both body and spirit, and many had failed in the past. To pass, it was to prove that one was worthy, that the spirits of the ancestors had truly bestowed their blessing. To fail meant exile, or worse, the anger of the spirits. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. Some nodded solemnly, accepting her decision. Others looked away, their fear palpable. Nyoka's eyes narrowed, his skepticism clear, but he said nothing. The elders, who had gathered to witness Ebony's return, began to speak in low tones, discussing the terms of the ritual. It would be performed at dawn, when the first light of the sun bathed Tandasa in its golden glow. The ritual would test Ebony in ways she could not anticipate. It would demand more than physical strength. It would probe her soul, her heart, and her intentions. As Ebony prepared for the ritual, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had already changed in ways that went beyond the mark on her wrist or the whispers in the Baobab. The tension in the village was suffocating, and she knew that the ritual of truth would be the moment when everything came to a head. Her heart pounded as she faced the unknown trials ahead, but she was determined to prove herself. She would not be defined by fear or by the mark that now marked her as something different. She was Ebony, the daughter of Tandasa, and she would protect the harmony of her people, no matter what it cost her. The night before the ritual, she sat alone in the small hut that had once been her home, her thoughts racing. She couldn't help but recall the moments she had spent inside the Baobab, the strange forces, the whispers, the ancestors who had visited her in her dreams. What had they meant? Was she truly protecting? And most importantly, what awaited her in the coming ritual? She had survived the Baobab, but this would be her ultimate test. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Ebony knew that the answer she sought lay just beyond the horizon. Under the glowing full moon, Ebony stood at the center of the village of Tandasa, surrounded by villagers who gathered in a solemn circle. Their chants filled the night air, rising and falling like the wind in the trees. The ritual of truth had begun, and Ebony, though nervous, felt the weight of her destiny pressing upon her. The elders, including Nyoka, watched closely, their eyes filled with expectation. In her hands, Ebony held a small, carved bowl containing a potion made from sacred herbs, its dark liquid shimmering with a faint, otherworldly glow. She could feel the eyes of the villagers on her as she lifted it to her lips. The liquid burned as it slid down her throat, a warmth flooding her chest, followed by a sharp heat that spread through her body like fire. Her breath caught in her throat as she struggled to stay steady, the potion working its ancient magic on her. When the time came, Ebony stepped forward, her feet touching the coals that had been prepared for the trial. The heat was unbearable, but she pressed on, knowing she had no choice but to continue. With each step, the searing pain of the flames became harder to ignore. Just as she was about to falter, the mark on her wrist, the mysterious symbol that had appeared after her time in the Baobab, began to glow brighter. It pulsed with energy, sending a surge through her body. The flames around her began to shrink back, as if the fire itself was afraid of the mark. A strong gust of wind swept through the village, powerful enough to extinguish the fire beneath her feet. The villagers gasped in unison, their eyes wide with awe and fear. Ebony could feel the energy of the wind, like the breath of the ancestors themselves. Then a voice, Ebony's voice, but not hers, spoke from her lips, carrying the weight of ancient wisdom. The balance of Tandaza is fragile, the voice declared, its tone echoing through the village. Protect the land, or face the wrath of those who came before you. The villagers stood frozen, their faces a mix of fear and reverence. The voice was unmistakable. The spirits had spoken through Abony. The wind carried the message of warning, and in that moment, Abony understood. She was no longer just a girl who had returned from the Baobab. She was the messenger of the ancestors, chosen to protect the delicate balance of the land. As the last words echoed into the night, Abony collapsed, her body drained from the intensity of the ritual. The villagers rushed to her, their hands trembling as they helped her to the ground. She fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the energy of the ritual consuming her. The morning light came slowly, its warmth touching Abony's face as she awoke. She felt different, heavier, as though the power she had received had altered her on a fundamental level. Her limbs ached, but there was also a strange sense of renewal, as though she had been reborn. She rose slowly, her gaze meeting the villagers around her. They watched her with a mixture of awe and respect, no longer seeing the girl who had gone into the Baobab, but a woman chosen to carry the weight of the ancestors' message. The elders, including Nyoka, nodded solemnly, acknowledging the truth of the ritual. Abony had proven herself. She had received the spirit's blessing, but with it came a responsibility she could not turn away from. The land of Tandaza, the people she loved, and the delicate balance of nature that surrounded them were all in her hands now. The villagers, once unsure of her role, now saw her as a bridge between the living and the spirits. The transformation was complete. Abony had not only survived the Baobab, but she had become the guardian of Tandaza's future. Her path was no longer hers to choose, but one she had to walk with humility and strength. As she looked out over the village, the weight of her new role began to settle in. She had been chosen, and there was no turning back. The burden of the ancestors' message was hers to carry, and she accepted it, knowing that the survival of her people and the land rested on her shoulders. If you enjoyed this video, please help us grow by subscribing to this humble channel. And if you'd like to watch more videos like this, we prepared the next video especially for you. Click here to watch.